Good evening, everybody. We're going to begin this work session solely devoted to our budget. And I want to thank our acting finance director for joining us. I believe everybody on the council got a copy of the memo that the city administrator sent out. I appreciate Mr. Alshire bringing this to the fore in terms of proposing the idea of having a special work session or a special focus of this council on a long-term budget strategy. I think we all are aware of the pending budget situation for next year, the pending deficit. So as we look to the future, I think it's important to recognize that we're still in the tail end of this recession, that the recession hasn't ended here in Hagerstown. There is still a lot of work to be done in positioning the operations and finances for the future. I think it's important to recognize the work that city staff, including the city administrator and the finance team, have done to keep the budget balanced in the last several years, and for the work that they're doing to present us with the options that we have before us now. And of course, the hard work is up to the folks sitting around this table in front of me to figure out what direction to go. And I think the city administrator, the finance director are looking for some clear direction as the city administrator will be starting to prepare his budget probably in December and January as the budget season gets nearer. So anyway, I think with that we will, the will of the council was to start with the list of suggested revenues, and the first one on the list is the stormwater management fee, and this was actually brought up might have been a couple months ago already. Didn't really seem to have a whole lot of support amongst council members, but let's have the discussion again. I know one of the big issues is that if there aren't specific projects tied to the fee, that it would be hard for members of the council to support that fee. So we could discuss specific projects that will be affiliated with that fee, or parts of the existing budget that might be covered by this fee. So let's have at it. Who would like to start?
I don't mind.
Go for it.
Starting. Yeah, I think in our previous two discussions on this issue, the first, I think, generally solidified that there does not appear to be support for a blanket stormwater management fee. But I think in our second discussion, there seemed to be at least some interest in a targeted approach to stormwater management improvements and some costs associated with those areas in which those targeted projects occur. And just for me, I think that that's a plausible approach. I think it's quantifiable then for those specific areas, rather than the blanket approach of X cost for X properties, and it's just going to get spent somewhere. I think that you could clearly conclude in any number of cases where stormwater management is an evolving process, and I use one example that I can think of is off of Burhan's Boulevard. I don't know, maybe 6 years ago, there is what we would really consider a regional stormwater management facility on the south portion of that, where the one, I guess, just northwest of the Hagerstown Business Park is. It is a stormwater management facility near the rail yard or near the rail crossing that is not of great quality, but I think we could all recognize that a number of things happen. One is there are certain levels of development, mostly on the commercial industrial type side, that happen there, which leaves a lot of space impervious. And number two, it's largely a stormwater management pond, which we now manage, if you will, and have to make continued improvements to, and expansions accounted for. And I don't know if folks who have been by and have seen that stormwater management pond, but it does not, just my opinion, it does not function probably in the exact manner in which we would envision it to function to meet all of the requirements of today. And I look at something like that, and if there were the prioritization to say, okay, this is project number 3 in these list of 10 or 12 projects we identify as upgrades or expansions to our stormwater management facilities, and we're going to have to make these, whether we like it or not, then I think that there has to be some approach to recognize that the parties involved that utilize that structure participate in the upgrade cost associated with it. That, to me, I think is one of those examples where you can say, here's a specific area, there's a huge amount of impervious surface that has been created. It is a stormwater management facility that does not operate in the most optimal conditions. We're going to have to do this to meet bay restoration and those other mandatory improvements, and I think there has to be a funding mechanism identified to do that. Probably another example is there may be 1 or 2 ponds along the Eastern Boulevard corridor, or some of the areas around the city. Another good example is the amount of impervious area that exists in the East End, and that area is going to continue to evolve and be redeveloped, and I think that staff will come back and say, hey, here are stormwater management related projects identified with this specific area, and there is no new development happening. There's no new developer coming in and putting some big development on a property that isn't already impervious, or accounted for in some regulatory fashion 20 years ago or 50 years ago, but it's going to happen, and I don't think some blanket fee should account for it any more than I think that some general fund subsidy of that improvement should account for it. I think we need to recognize that, prioritize them, and say, okay, here's the fee associated with this, because this is going to be a cost incumbent upon all parties that utilize that stormwater management facility in its current manner, and here's the upgrade that has to be made for its state mandated improved manner, and that to me is the idea that I would have behind any type of stormwater management fee process that I think is a compromise to our initial discussions. So
I just have 2 questions in response to that. I guess the first one is would there be any general fund impact? I mean, in other words, are the kinds of improvements you're saying need to take place at these, sounds like what is technically private property, you're saying the city is having to come in and make improvements, or?
Well, we certainly absorb the maintenance and ownership responsibilities of those ponds in a number of these cases over time, in which additional parties are made sort of parties there too, to those facilities.
Not as many as in the county, though.
Oh no, the county has like 46 of them.
In the city, we have limited ours to about 10 or maybe 15 in the city. The rest of them are vastly still privately maintained.
And I guess my second question is it legal to just target a certain property and say, all right, we're going to charge you a fee, but not, the business next door or in a different neighborhood in Hagerstown?
So, Councilman, I guess just to follow up on that question, if I understand what you're saying, Councilman, if there is say a pond, and there's 10 properties that drain to that
It's a regional facility.
we would do an assessment district basically on that area that's draining to that pond.
I think you need to assess the additional impacts or the additional upgrades that are required for that facility to meet those new regulatory provisions.
Right.
And those are examples that come to my mind of areas where they do function in a more regional manner, and in which we generally oversee, versus going into a private development where the stormwater management facilities are still privately maintained through some type of HOA. That there isn't a change to the character of that significantly over time. I mean, I just don't think you can blanket that approach. And clearly there are areas within that more urban core of the city where storm systems and storm drainage systems are and were designed much differently than they are today, and in which we're going to have to sort of retrofit and upgrade and expand and deal with, quantity and quality issues to address those new regulatory mandates. That I think is what I felt after our last meeting. We sort of directed staff to sort of go back and say, tell us the dozen or so projects that you would foresee that do two things. One is address those regulatory requirements that are going to be coming upon us, and number two, prioritize them in a fashion either for pending development and or return on the investment.
Yes, and we have that report finished. We just got it last week, and actually next week we were going to bring those projects in to present them to you all.
Mr. Brubaker.
Can I suggest that for each of these topics as we go through, we have staff do a presentation on what the most recent proposal was and what it would yield and so forth? Because I don't see it in materials. So, I think it would be a good idea. I know at one time we did discuss it. I think there was a staff recommendation. Because I would like to hear that as a base then for, where we go or don't go from,
Good idea,
from
Marty.
there. And I'd like that for each of these topics, actually.
So some hard data to look at.
Well, yeah, the most recent proposal.
Is your mic on?
Even though we've perhaps moved past it, I would like to have just the staff do a brief introduction and give us an idea of what the revenue implications are, and then what expenditure implications there might be as well. And then we can go from there with other ideas. Kristen, it was good to start because he has a lot of ideas, but I think that would give us all a background to start.
Yeah, because I think that one thing we'll find from that report that you provide us is, here are the X number of projects, here is the costs, here is, the time frame in which, we sort of expect to do them over time, and here are the prerequisites for why we're having to do them. And being able to understand those things, I think, at least for me, puts it in perspective of where that responsibility lies. Because I don't think, or at least I would hope, that the answer from this body wouldn't be that we're just simply not going to do them, but rather let's figure out a mechanism in which to get them done.
But I guess, my questions are more fundamental on the revenue side. Is it going to be based on impervious surface? Is it going to be based simply on a spin-off of what the tax assessment or the simply the area of a lot? Because I think if we did a fee, it would apply to all, not just, it would apply to nonprofits as well as profits.
That's typically how utilities are done.
Yeah. So, things like that, and then what the estimates are of what that might raise, and do we have projects? The thing about this that to me, it doesn't raise, how much are we spending now that we could put this into, so that could then go to the general fund.
That's what my first question was.
Yeah.
Does this really offset, or are we
And
just
then otherwise,
looking at new
it goes to projects like Kristen's referring to that are worthwhile, I'm sure, but it's not a net
doesn't
revenue
impact the
yet.
general?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't impact.
Right,
the
whether
general.
they're one or the other or a bit of both.
Yeah.
From our research, most stormwater utility fees are set up so that there can be an increase in service.
Right.
That would be additional street sweeping, planting trees, some of the projects that we've been talking about here, getting those finished. It's not really designed to supplant existing things that we're already doing. So it would be to try to meet some of the requirements that we're facing from our colleagues in Maryland and the EPA level that are putting these requirements on it. Those fees would be used to help address those.
And that's what I said, I think it'd be a bit of both, because I think you have, credits and they come in different forms. whether it is upgrades or expansions or new or offsetting project items.
The state has talked at times of doing a statewide fee. It never has taken off. Do you know wasn't that based on impervious surface?
I think the state's fee, correct me, Jim, if I'm wrong, is they were just going to basically mandate to the Phase 2 communities. We're a Phase 2 community. Phase 1 communities are the ones with the higher population, mostly to the east of us. They're already required to do a stormwater utility fee. They were going to mandate on us to do a stormwater utility fee, but I don't think they necessarily said how it had to be done.
Okay.
But I think the more immediate concern is some of the Phase 1 entities frankly have snubbed
Yep.
the process.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that I think that's...
No question.
And we have the continuing issue is when we levy a fee like this and the county doesn't, it makes us less competitive, no matter how right we might be or how justified it might be. It makes us less competitive in all types of building, you know.
I mean, this is the famous rain tax, right?
I think some people do call it that, yeah.
I think most people call it that, and then they laugh when they call it that. But as a county, we're not required to impose, as a local area, we're not required to impose it, right? It's only certain larger counties are required to impose it.
But coming down the road, we will be required to do projects to improve the water quality that leaves our community.
As Phase 2 entities.
Yes. That is coming.
And if the water quality is being diminished by certain privately owned places, they already pay taxes. I mean, it seems to me that their taxes really ought to be used to pay for the problem.
Well, the idea of like an impervious surface tax is that is what is generally the worst, causes the worst damage in the stormwater field. So, you know, that would make a differential between types of properties, and, you know, but it's very difficult to implement and be fair.
Well, there have to be a rate study done. I think we'd want to put something together that would be, because it will be challenged. It's been challenged in other, you know, there's
Right.
hundreds, if not thousands of these across the United States, but they always use a rate study to develop them. And what they do, as I understand it, is they look at what your need is and what your, what projects you need to do and generate the revenue and set the rate based on that.
Well, almost all of these are things that are focused at certain violators, certain standards versus just a general tax that everybody helps pay for. And those are always difficult issues to weigh, I agree, Don. You say a lot of these are aimed that way.
If I can, the only issue I have with this whole discussion is I don't see this getting us 1 inch closer to resolving what we're trying to resolve, which is the budget deficit. Because what we're here discussing is what I'm hearing is somewhat budget neutral, that we're going to be incurring expenses in the future, and this will be a method when we have to incur those expenses to pay for them, and that we need to be proactive.
But those future budget projections are going to include those necessary things we're going to have to do.
I don't disagree with you, but unless you're going to tell me that I'm wrong, I don't see them in next year's budget deficit equation. I do see them down the road in the future.
I don't know. I don't have the list of those projects. I don't know what we have programmed to do associated with those types of public works projects that could benefit from that process.
That's a very reasonable question to ask. That answers my question then, if we have an answer to that.
And the tough part to answer that question is what timetable are we actually on? Because we really haven't been given the exact timetable yet from the state that we have to meet all these things. We know it's going to be a big, expensive project.
Well, I guess one of the questions there, Rodney, is there something in the budget for next year's budget?
There
Yes,
is.
there
Okay.
is.
And how much are we talking about?
In fiscal year 15, in our CIPs, we estimated $200,000, and then it would be transfers from
I'm
the
sorry, how
general.
much?
$200,000, and then it would be covered by transfers from the general.
Okay, so that's the number
And-
we're dealing with.
Fiscal year
It's covered
15.
by current revenue. So,
And if you go
that's the
back,
amount.
if you go back to my sort of 16 items, one of the items I had on there, you know, and I'm a pretty simple guy, I tried to keep it in simple math, was 150K identified for these types of projects that we're going to have to incur annually. And what just my thought process was, is you go through and you have these prioritized lists and you say, okay, you know, in 15 this one, and 16 this one, and so forth, and you're able to identify, okay, is this a general project that is covered under general purposes, or is it a target-specific project? And maybe the Eastern Boulevard expansion is probably a bad example, but that's an example where you say, okay, here is a road that needs to be doubled, and here is a mechanism for which we're going to accomplish that isn't general fund subsidized. And I guess I see these projects as sort of that approach is, you know, it may in 1 year or may not be that, and you say, okay, there's 150K I have sort of knocked out by saying this is a project-specific area, a project-specific improvement that is project-specific parties associated with it, and removes that, you know, and saves.
I don't have any problem with that theory at all.
That's sort of how I envision it.
Michelle, is the $200,000 related to a specific project, or is it a placeholder?
No, it's just a
It was a placeholder.
And we put in the current year's budget for that fiscal year.
But you're going to give us that report next week.
Right, and the numbers are huge.
Yeah, they're going to be much different than
Every project's
$200,000.
$500,000.
I was going to say, I bet your project list is in the millions of dollars.
Millions, tens if not hundreds of millions.
Okay, the numbers are huge, but are they, is the state government requiring us to do that specifically?
They haven't put it in writing yet, but it's coming. When they give us our new NPDS permit, they will specify in there that we have to have certain water quality measures in place.
It's just like when you get your sewer allocation
Yes.
permit re-up, they say, okay, we're going to give you your sewer allocation re-up, and as MDE, we're going to say, here's the 12 things you need to do to meet these upgraded and updated standards, and it's, you know, 4 parts per million of this and 3, and,
That's
you
a
know,
good analogy.
and you have to figure out how to account for that additional cost to improve your system in that manner.
And Rodney, you're thinking that the state may issue a draft of that permit
Yeah.
early 2014, and then it'll get worked out throughout the calendar year.
Right. All the Phase 1 communities, the permit is expired, and it's expired at their end. They're not, we haven't done anything wrong. They just haven't issued them. And we're expecting that, like you said, either late this year or early next year, at least a draft of it.
Which is why I think an important part of this process, in terms of looking at it budgetarily and looking at it project specifically, is to say, you know what, there is no way we can reasonably accomplish this $100 million project. But here are a dozen or so projects that are a good return on investment, are doable, are manageable, are project specific, and you know, we can accomplish that at least
Over
show we're
time.
making some tangible effort.
Right.
Unlike other jurisdictions who have simply said, you know what, it's $300 million and we're not going to do anything.
And it might turn out the state doesn't like any of them. I mean, here we have an opportunity to put the $200,000 into our deficit next year and just worry about these projects in the future. If it's nothing but a placeholder and you're throwing $200,000 at projects that are going to cost you in the millions, that doesn't help us in any way at all. $200,000 doesn't buy anything in the way of water or road projects or these kinds of projects, or not much anyhow, a little bit of curbing.
Nor does helping us deferring things we're ultimately going to have to do anyway.
Well,
Well, let's give, because we're coming up on the half an hour and we have 2 more topics to discuss tonight. I want to try to give staff some clear direction where to go from here. It sounds like we've recognized the long-term budgetary implications of the stormwater
Yeah.
issue, and that it might be worthwhile to have staff, start to work some of these things out with bringing in some data or any other kind of information you can gather
We
for
will
us
have our
about
list
the
of
fee.
priority projects
Yeah.
next
So
week
that'll
on the
be
work session.
Right, so
if it's
that'll be
okay
the
with
next
everyone.
discussion point for that particular issue. Does anyone want to say anything else about stormwater management fee before we move on to the next topic? All right. I think the other one, the next one was a fire service tax. And I think everybody knows, well, I want to congratulate the fire union actually for having their medal ceremony on
Great
Saturday.
program.
It was a nice event, and I appreciated the invitation. Chief is joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Chief.
Thank you.
Currently, we do not have a fire tax. Are there other communities in the state of Maryland that have a fire tax? I know Frederick County, I think, had one, but then they got rid of it. Is that right, Mr. Alshire? Frederick County?
They did. They rolled it into their general fund because they were actually losing, or the general fund was subsidizing that process because it
At
just
one
wasn't
time,
accessible.
Montgomery County had a whole array of fire taxes, one for each department.
One for each due area.
So, but where that is right now, I'm not sure. But I would wager there are fire taxes around. But oftentimes that's in a county where there's differential service areas too.
Chief, you've done a little research on Frederick City.
I did. I actually brought a copy of the ordinance that they used. You'd like to have that. Can you get that out?
Thanks, Chief.
And one of the points that Councilmember Alshire has already made is that Frederick County, the one that Chief is currently handing out, did initially, when they established this, set up like special tax districts in order to charge these fees, but then I think in fiscal year 13 or 14, they recently rolled all that back into their general fund because they were having to subsidize it with general fund transfers.
In FY14 they did. And they had an urban suburban, and it was countywide. And to me, it was applied, just my opinion, backwards because folks in the urban area, I believe, paid more than the suburban, although it's more costly to provide fire service to the more suburban areas. Just my 2 cents on that.
I think it was based a lot on staffing, where the departments had total volunteer coverage, the fee was less. In areas where they had a lot of career personnel, the fee was higher. We wouldn't have that situation here. Our coverage is pretty consistent throughout the city.
And I think by you saying that, just my 2 cents, and I'll shut up, as this is one I don't support because I think you put it exactly right. This is a general service of public safety that the city provides on a uniform level and thus is covered within our property tax. And one in which I think was probably arguable to our citizens when the differential did change to say, hey, we're going to keep part of that because we provide an additional level of public safety above and beyond what you receive outside of the corporate limits. That's just me.
It's going to be awful hard to sell a fire tax on the basis, for the reason of raising police officer salaries. I mean, that's how the public's going to perceive it if we go this route.
Yeah, I don't know, who would you tax with the fire tax? Who did they tax in Frederick?
Property owners.
So I mean, if all you're doing is adding,
raise it a couple cents.
is adding a
Why we
tax.
didn't do it before?
Yeah, if all you're doing is adding a tax to the property owners, all you're doing is making firefighters unpopular. I agree with Don. What you're saying is, we're going to fund everybody in our city with general service money, but when it comes to firefighters, we want you guys to know we're taxing you for these people, and if they want to raise it, you'll know why your fire tax is going up. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, if you're talking about some sort of county-wide system
It's a different system.
where you take care of fire and rescue the way it is needed for decades to be taken care of, that's one thing. But if you're just talking about a city tax and property tax, city tax,
Well, you've suggested in the past that instead of doing that, just raise the property
Yeah.
tax a couple cents. if that's what you want to accomplish. Well, it sounds like you're opening up a box there, Mr. Metzner, in terms of the fire rescue system countywide. I mean, is anyone else in the
Oh,
council?
that box has been opened up for so long.
Well, is anyone else interested in exploring that with the county? I mean, this is something that should be on the table.
I think exploring it with the county, it's been explored with the county by Fire and Rescue Association for so long that that's their problem.
15 years.
And I think the difference, and the reason I wouldn't be interested in exploring with the county after visiting, and I say this all the time, after visiting all 27 companies, clearly city operations for fire service are structured in a different manner than they are at the county level. And what you clearly have outside of the corporate limits and inside of the corporate limits, we've just chosen to address it differently. In the fire service is you have an increase in the regulatory demand, you have an increase in costs associated for the service, and you have an aging out and decline in the volunteer workforce. And the county has chosen, in just my opinion, the county has chosen not to address those three issues, and we as a city have made a conscious effort to address those issues with paid personnel, upgraded fire facilities, and a professional staff. I mean, there's no other way to slice that than that reality. So
On the other
I
hand,
don't think you're going to
Frederick
accomplish
did have
that.
a city fire department,
Which they handed over to the
which
county.
they handed over to the county, and which is now paid for by a county-wide tax, as I understand it. And, but if we dissolved our fire department, the tax wouldn't, I don't think they'd get away with applying the tax just within our corporate limits, because the urban area is defined much differently and is much greater. And I think that's what any, legitimate boundary would be for a fire tax. But doesn't seem to be part of the public dialogue right now, so that's not going to help our.
Well, it sounds like there's really no interest in a fire tax, no interest in exploring any kind of changing of the structure of the current level of service.
Let me just throw one idea out. There's a possibility here, and I'm using this term broadly, of privatization. The fact is that the volunteer system in the county is having increasing problems. I think Fair Play has demonstrated that. And maybe when that sort of thing occurs, maybe the city, who has adequate equipment, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, adequately equipment, well-trained firefighters, people who know their way around, know how to fight fires, could step in, and the city could be paid by the county for doing the services that perhaps, perhaps the volunteer services can't do in that particular instance.
Heck, a lot of our paid firefighters volunteer in the county.
And then there are also paid firefighters in the county, because I know
Right.
that when
Right.
Bill Weibel was a commissioner, he said it was headed that way. Unfortunately, it takes men to work 2 and 3 jobs
Sure.
anymore, and to be a volunteer is a very difficult.
Well, it's just a thought, because it does present some opportunities for the Hagerstown firefighters to be enterprising.
The only thing I would say in general is, I don't see how we can be a competitive city if we have to keep raising our taxes relative to the areas around us. And we may have to consider, can we do all the services we currently do? But that would require an across-the-board examination, including this one. Can we do it? Can we afford it now?
Okay, but what I'm saying, now, just to be clear now, is that if our firefighters have to leave the city and go in the county to fight fires,
They
do
that now.
Yeah,
that
they do that
that they
all
would
the
get
time.
paid, that they would get paid for that service.
Plus there's-
They leave the city limits now as second due area responders, just
Right.
as first due areas responders in those other areas outside of the city
Right.
come in
Right,
as second due
that's fine. The
responders.
flip side is we get serviced by Funkstown and Long Meadow and Halfway. I would think every bit as much as we're providing services
It's
to them.
just about 50/50.
Yeah.
You have written agreements on some of that, don't you?
We do.
Coordination of service
Yes,
agreements.
sir, that's correct.
Because I looked into that when I first came on.
We
Well, it's-
depend on each other.
And I think that's a good thing,
It is.
for the better of everybody's safety.
Yes, it's just like with the sheriff's department and the city police being able to cross boundaries. They're working together. I certainly would hate to lose either one as far as that joint with the county. I just don't see it, especially with the police. I mean, I've heard before with the police as far as being all of county. God help us here in the city. Same way with the firefighters. I think that, you know, what they do now is what they should be doing.
Okay,
And
so
Marty's
no-
going to say to me, and how are we going to pay for it? And I don't know, Marty.
So it sounds like no further work on fire tax. That's sort of dead at this point, is what I'm sensing. All right. Let's move on to red light cameras.
Lou?
I know we have one person who's already taken a firm position on that. Is there anybody else that wants to take that position at this point? I know the chief is
Well,
here, and
I hate the idea of bringing them up as a revenue item. I think the school cameras have slowed traffic down immensely everywhere in front of the schools, on Northern, on Pangbourne, on Memorial, on countless other places where traffic needed to slow down, frankly.
Right.
And I think they're working to that extent. We already have the lowest fines in the whole state, you know. So, you know, we're not in there crassly reaching out. You
I guess
have to
the
have a
question
fine
is-
to make it work.
the question is it a problem? Is running red lights a problem?
Well,
I guess the
you-
data that would
you-
show
yeah,
that
you
is
could
the number
debate
of
that.
accidents or the number of people being pulled over for running a red light, and I don't know, I personally don't see
You
that
can
there's
get
a
arguments
demonstrated
that they
need.
cause accidents, actually.
Chief, what do you have to say about red light cameras, or what research have you done into the matter?
With that introduction, Chief. I toss it to you.
As openly as possible,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you very much. Sir, well, in preparing for this, I contacted Chief Ludwell down in Frederick and asked him how their program's going. And I brought a quick handout for the council just to have with them. And the quick numbers are they saw almost a 60% reduction in crashes. They've had them in place since 2005, and they just expanded the program this year, in fact, this month. And they have 7 separate locations, intersections that they cover, and they've received their annual revenue. You can't talk about one without the other. Their annual revenue they're seeing is at $200,000. That's after paying their vendor. So it's not the level of a speed camera project, but there's certainly some revenue there. Wouldn't cost the city anything to run the program. Would it reduce accidents at intersections? Absolutely it would. Do we have intersections in the city that could definitely benefit from this? We certainly do. Those top 10 intersections for the city haven't changed for accidents in years. They just don't change. Are red light running a cause of those accidents? They certainly are. Could it reduce accidents in certain intersections in the city? It can.
Whether it's just that motorcycle, that horrible motorcycle crash on Vesa Boulevard was a result of running a red light, was it not?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Dual highway and Eastern Boulevard. The flip side to it is not just, of course, the first one is public safety. You can reduce an accident, goodness sakes, you can reduce
Save
a
a life,
fatality.
right.
You can save a life, save an injury, a huge amount of cost that you save, and impact to somebody who might go missing work because their car's out of commission, or worse yet, they're out of commission. So that
I agree with
there's
you.
the
I
public
think-
safety
I
side
think
of it.
public safety is the number one reason we do speed cameras or red light cameras, for that matter. Revenue is just a byproduct, a secondary effect of what we're trying to achieve
Sure,
with public
and-
safety.
And the third piece to that is reduction in calls for service for the police. It takes quite a bit of time to investigate an accident, draw it up, tow the cars away, clean up the intersection, and get it back functioning
That's a good
again.
point.
It draws down the resources that we do have. So for every intersection accident that you can avoid, you're saving man-hours on top of that, property and lives. So it does make a lot of sense. It's certainly a controversial topic, as speed cameras were. It does work in Frederick, And I would say we do have intersections in the city that could benefit from this.
And I just have to say about the speed cameras, because I get emails and all kinds of communication about people who don't like the speed cameras. It's just, and they'll say, I don't know why the city says it's for the safety of the kids, because it's all about the revenue. If it's all about the kids, why don't you just turn them off after school? But my argument back to those people is you should follow the rules, whether there's a camera watching you or not, or whether it's school time or not. And it seems like some people want to get out of having to abide by the law, for the sake of being able to speed whenever they want to. Like I said, I think the reason we have speed cameras is obviously public safety and the safety of school children, but the revenue is a byproduct of that. I don't see the speed cameras going away anytime soon, and I wouldn't be opposed to exploring red light cameras, but not as a source of revenue in terms of closing a budget gap. I think if the police identify certain intersections where there's higher fatalities or calls for service or whatever, I think we should explore that on its own, but like Mr. Brubaker said, not as a source of revenue.
Well, one other problem I have is that Frederick's a going concern. People are used to going into Frederick. Frederick is right now a going concern. We're trying to lure people into Hagerstown. We're desperately trying to lure people into Hagerstown. And I use the word desperately, lure people into Hagerstown. And the speed cameras, I voted for it after a lot of discussion of three different options: speed cameras, red light cameras, and just plain speed cameras outside of school zones, And we went with the speed cameras, the school cameras, as something that was most convincing in terms of public safety. But I already think, again, it's like the other fees and things that aren't in the area around us. We're trying to get people to come into Hagerstown, and I think this is something that possibly will cause inhibitions on people to do that.
One of my objections to red light cameras, which could be overcome, by the way, is an experience I had sitting in court in Frederick County and watching some poor folks who got these red light tickets. And it's just like with the red light tickets, you have video. So, you actually get to see what happened. And I saw these people explain their financial difficulties and everything in court, and court sets all this up and takes all this time. And I think three of these people that were in court got nailed for what I would call a California stop at a red light, right turn on red at 2 o'clock in the morning at an intersection where there is no traffic anywhere, and their tires did not come to a complete stop before they made the right-hand turn on red. And the judges had no sympathy, acted like they weren't even in the courtroom, and the fine and everything was the same. And I sat there and I looked at that and I thought, that doesn't look like public safety to me, and that doesn't look like, it looks like the typical situation in a courtroom, which is, if I let people know that you're going to get a break if you come in with a sob story, everybody's going to come in with a sob story. So I can tell you this, my objections to red light cameras may go down significantly if we're not talking about including ticketing people who don't come to a complete stop on a right-hand turn versus making a right-hand turn on a red light that is marked no turn on red. That's a different story. That's a totally different story.
Like the intersection of Bester and Memorial Boulevard, where folks will come up toward Bester, says no turn on red, and folks will go through it every day, 24 hours a day.
I have no difficulty with that type of thing. But that was one of our problems. I know if we want to go this route, this is a very controversial issue. You will find that there are going to be a lot of people coming telling you that there are studies to show they cause more accidents. I'm not one to believe that, but there's the argument that, geez, when people see the sign for a camera, as soon as it turns yellow, they slam on their brakes and somebody rear ends them. I don't know that there's any validity to that, but you should be prepared for, believe me, because we've looked at this in the traffic and parking, we've looked at this. what the current makeup of the Traffic and Parking Board would recommend or not recommend, I can't say. I know one time the makeup of that board would not have favored, but I agree with the chief. There are intersections, and I think Eastern and Dole was a very obvious one. So as much as I object to it, I've given you one of my number one objections that could be overcome, and it would, to me, have to be severely limited to a showing. I mean, if we were asked to put a red light camera at an intersection where nobody could show there's been any accidents or any issues, I would be strongly opposed to it. And I think that I would like to think the balance of the council would too, because I do believe this is not being done for money making, and I would not support it for that purpose. But for public safety, come in with the statistics and show us that at these intersections there's an issue, then it's a whole different story. Then you're looking at responsibility for public safety.
And then there's high incident intersection, then high incident with personal injury. They're two
Right.
different definitions.
Right. So I mean, I think we need a lot more
Fender
information
benders
from
versus
the chief.
personal injury. Kristen, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think your point's well taken. You know, if you come in and say, we're going to put one at Maryland Avenue and Howard Street, you know, and not at, you know, Virginia Avenue overpass and, you know, and Burhan's Boulevard, I think there's logic to that. For me, a couple of things. One is you say, you quote a direct neighbor, a neighboring jurisdiction that has experienced a noticeable drop in exactly what we're trying to have avoided. And, you know, so I look at that factor. I also take into account, you know, that week after week, since our, you know, taking office, folks talk about a number of things as it relates to public safety, like more officers on the streets downtown. And, you know, we hear that we're 16 officers short, now we're 8. You know, as of February, we'll be, you know, fully 8 and hopefully improving. But I just look at that piece of technology and as a tool sort of in that toolbox to say, you know, how do we put the manpower where we would like it to be focused and the technology power where we would like it to be focused and accomplish, you know, 2 tasks sort of at once. And I think it's a logical step in that direction for certain intersections that clearly are prone to that type of activity and eat up a lot of that manpower time that we're trying to use more efficiently. So for me, I just think it's a sell.
Okay.
And I guess the question for the chief would be, in order to avoid something like Mr. Metzner was talking about is, I mean, an officer would review those red light camera tickets, if you will, just like they do the Safe Speeds for Schools tickets.
That's right.
And so, I mean, it would be, I guess, a policy of the department that if something comes across like what Mr. Metzner's describing, that it would be officer discretion or according to a policy that, you know, if it's a California stop, as he refers to it, at a red light at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, that would be, I guess, up to that officer or as a policy in the police department. How would that, I mean, there would be a way for that not to end up in court.
Well, I would think it's such a broad intersection, like the dual highway in Eastern, and certainly isn't our top 5 highest intersection accidents, and a lot of them are personal injury accidents. You could, I'm certain the technology exists to pick the lane that you want to observe. It's so wide you would have to have multiple cameras just to catch the eastbound traffic, because you have that. The big violator there is that left on red, and everybody tailgates through that left on red, and we could go out there now and watch 3 or 4 cars tailgate through a left on red, and that's at approaching traffic at, you know, a good. They're coming at a good clip, and that is the typical accident at that location. So, for that large of an intersection, you know, 1 or 2 cameras, red light cameras in the proper lane, focusing on the proper lane, could achieve our goal. I could check with some vendors to see what the technology does. As far as a policy of where we ignore right on reds, California stops, perhaps we don't focus the camera in that intersection. I'd have to talk to the city attorney about that on
I don't know
on where
how you work
basically
that.
we'd be witnessing a violation.
I would imagine there's some discretion there
I
in terms
think
of the issuing officer.
A good response to this is, because I hear what the chief says about where you put cameras, okay? And this becomes a key issue to me. So let's take, for example, an intersection we can all understand, and that's the intersection you've described, Eastern and the Dole. One might ask, how many accidents have occurred because of rights on red without full stops? And if the answer is, geez, none, then why are we worried about putting a camera to enforce that particular violation?
When it's really the left.
When it's the left turn that's causing the accidents, not the rights on red.
There are about 4 lanes heading east. I think that there's one left, and then 2 in the center and 1 to the right. So,
Right.
So we focus our camera on those three primary lanes, the straight-through lanes, which would obviously cause a T-bone intersection accident, and then the left-hand turn lane. Something like that, I could explore that with a vendor and see, is it possible to aim it just in those certain lanes? Again, and that data would be pretty easy to pull on where exactly how our accidents, I know we've already done it, so.
Well, is the incident reports compiled so that you would know whether they were due to left turn or
Yes.
people running the straights, which I see that too.
Yeah, well,
you
there'd be an
know,
accident report
on
for
that
every
one.
accident.
Yeah, there's a
I
detailed
know, but it's-
diagram.
What I meant is it compiled that way though, you know what I mean? Yeah.
It certainly is. Yeah, we did a study just last year and picked our top intersections, submitted some of them to engineering. However, some of our suggestions were not able to be put in place because they're governed by state highway. Another one is Washington Street at Locust. We've
Yeah,
actually
I
had
was gonna-
rollover accidents there.
gonna bring that up. That was
Rollover
a-
accidents
I had
at
a
that
friend that was, yeah,
intersection,
in a bad one
and
there.
we can't get a solution for it. That could be another location where it could be, a useful tool. There's been more than one rollover accident at Washington and Franklin Street. It's amazing, just the low speed, but it's that, they're hitting right at that right angle and rolling the cars over. We've had them coming the other way too on Washington Street at Mulberry. Someone coming south on Mulberry hit a car and roll it over. Just running southbound on Mulberry Street. There's no right on red there, I don't believe. Coming out on that because of the parking. So that could be another location.
That I
So we
always
could pick a few of these.
wonder whether there isn't some weird visibility issue and there's, people can't see the signal or there's, is it people running yellow or an early red or is it people just simply going right through a red light? In which case speed cameras won't do any good.
No, but red light.
If people just don't see it and drive right through it, which appears to happen too a lot,
Yeah, I
Not
think-
necessarily a late red, or an early red, I mean, but, something beyond that, because you don't see it.
Well, can we-
Anyhow, though, that's enough on this
Should we,
issue.
so obviously if we go forward with some more exploration of red light cameras, it's not to fill the budget gap, but
Right.
because we want to improve public safety in those areas.
For where that would put them everywhere.
Right, so is there a consensus then we want to have the chief continue to explore that?
Yeah,
I have a
Yes.
question or two first.
Sure, please, Mr. Munson.
Chief, do we get the revenues off of these, or do part of these revenues go to the state?
None of it would go to the state. And Frederick's model's set up just like our speed camera model where it's split with the vendor. I would say that it would go to the state if it went to district court to be challenged in court, just like our speed camera tickets do. If they're challenged in court, there is a fee that's taken by the state in that, but that's very few.
Okay, and Marty asked a question, which I didn't hear you answer. Suppose we made yellow lights a little longer to give people opportunities to get through when they're, when they're maybe following too close or something. Wouldn't that be helpful?
Some of the intersections, and I go back to Washington and Locust, and I don't think Rodney's still here. One of our suggestions was let's hold up the red light on the other way, hold up the green a little longer, so they don't just switch red and green at the same
Right.
time, and we
Right.
get this. And first off, we don't govern those lights; they're run by the state highway. Ones that are run just by our signal department, absolutely, we can make some adjustments to that. But our suggestions at Washington and Locust aren't that simple for, I guess, 2 reasons. One, it's a state-controlled intersection, and 2, they're timed in with all the other lights throughout the city, so it's to make an adjustment. So I think in some cases, yes, we could make delay the light from turning green a little longer to make them safer. And I think those adjustments have been made throughout the years at intersections that we have control over. Perhaps some of the ones that we might end up doing would be ones that are on state routes that aren't as flexible. in making those adjustments.
I would imagine you'd have the same problem at the dual highway in Eastern because it's a state highway, Route
Yes.
40. And now, I know some of the intersections with pedestrian crosswalks with the directions for pedestrians, those have a delayed green basically because it gives time for pedestrians to cross the street before the next round of traffic comes in. So I'm wondering if the corner of Locust, those corners, Locust and Baltimore where they intersect Franklin, have those kinds of pedestrian, because that might be a way around if we can get the state to
Add a
put in some of those
crosswalk
crosswalks
on Washington Street.
for pedestrians. I mean, then we risk having pedestrians get killed by people who are ignoring red lights, but that would maybe achieve the same end. I don't know if that's an angle.
We're
we can
outside
work
my
with the state.
level of expertise
Yeah.
there. I'd have to talk.
It's more
about it.
posing a question than anything.
I think it's a
rhetorical
it's a
question.
possible solution, actually, to add some more crosswalks, because you do get that natural delay in between the lights, like you see in the square. Although the square is another one of those locations that it gets run quite a bit. Difficult to enforce, I think. Why not just send the police out to enforce these things? Very difficult to enforce a red light intersection unless you're directly behind the car, and then you're sort of imposing another risk yourself by trying to turn your red lights on and go through an intersection where everybody's already kind of
right.
getting their mind around moving forward. To do a sting operation for red lights takes multiple police officers, and then you're sort of sitting out there in black and white cars. So
And
your
talk about
chance of
wasting,
catching them
right, resources,
diminishes.
yeah.
It's usually just when the police see these, we're usually coming after the crash happened and we're writing the ticket. So, did I
Okay,
answer
let
your
me-
question, Councilman?
Just let me just make this point. There are a lot of people who go through a red light maybe once every 5 years. For some reason, they're not paying attention at that particular time, but otherwise, they're perfectly law-abiding citizens. And, you know, I'm not so sure they ought to be punished severely for making a mistake. I mean, I assume they get through it and they live, okay, without a crash. I think that's a little unfair. I don't think too many people plan on going through red lights.
And I would
But-
say to that, sir, that that's what our court system's for. Oftentimes, you can sit in traffic court and someone can say,
Okay.
I have not had a violation in 15 years, and the judge gives you a pass on that one. That's quite often because of that, because you've shown a pattern of responsible driving.
Well,
On the other hand-
let me make this point. When I was in Annapolis, I supported school lights, school cameras, for which I got roundly smacked in the paper this Sunday for doing so. But I thought it was a real issue of safety, and you know, I really find it hard to consider red lights at this point unless it is extraordinarily regulated by this council. I really don't want to have red lights everywhere, and these programs tend to grow. We all know that, and I mean, I'm willing to be a little bit flexible on this because of the kinds of accidents that you talk about. I do know that at Locust and Washington, we have rollover accidents frequently. But I think that the program's going to have to be very, very tight and apply specifically to particular intersections and with frequent reports to the council of what's happening there, whether we still need the red light cameras, and why would we need red light cameras on other intersections before they would be installed. I mean, Marty's right. If you have red light cameras, you really get a reputation for having cameras. I won't drive in Washington, D.C. under any circumstances whatsoever because of their cameras. I've never been in traffic court in my life. except to watch it one time. And, but I won't drive in Washington DC for that very reason. And I think there are a lot of people who feel that way. And that's not a good reputation for Washington DC. And it wouldn't be a good reputation for Hagerstown. So if you propose a program, I would certainly like to see it as really regulated and really tight.
Yes, sir.
Penny, are you okay with moving forward with an exploration of this issue? And Kristen, Marty?
Sure, as long as
All right.
it's data-based and
Sure.
specific intersections.
Now, we've reached the end of what we had planned to talk about in terms of the first issue. Thank you, Chief. Do you want to, please, yeah, pass those out. If you did your homework, I want to see it.
He does a lot of homework.
I know.
His officers do anyhow.
There's more, Kristen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Is this what was on?
What I'm passing out are just the program results from Frederick, and actually I think the entire thing is available on Frederick's website, so.
There was something on the news this morning was it Frederick, that they were going with more lights?
They're
And
adding
how do you-
two more intersections
Okay,
to
because I
their
was
program.
going through one room and another, and I heard my husband moan. So,
Yeah, Frederick has
Can we have a
7.
map of the Frederick area?
I can talk to the chief about that.
I think it's on the website.
I think
Is
the
the map
bottom
on the
line is,
website?
It might be.
I think the bottom line, though, is whether it's a speed camera or a red light camera, they work. Because if you get a speed camera ticket, the likelihood of you going through that same spot again is going to be highly decreased. I mean, I encounter at least one set of speed cameras on my way to and from work every day. And just the other day, it was kind of a dark, overcast day, and I'm driving home from work. This is in Dickerson, Maryland, little tiny Dickerson. And I'm just rolling along on my country drive back to Hagerstown. The speed limit's 40 miles per hour, drops to 30 when you come into the corporate limit of Dickerson. And I saw this big bright flash in my rearview mirror, and I thought, geez, is there lightning? And then I realized, oh, I just got zapped. I'm still waiting for the ticket.
Yep.
I'm still waiting for the ticket, but I'm not going to go to court and try to come up
got
with some
lit.
cockamamie excuse for not following the law, because it's just like what Mr. Munson was saying. Sometimes you just get lost in a train of thought or whatever. It's not. I don't feel like I was being unsafe, but guess what? I'll pay that fine, and you can bet I will probably never get one again, because I will change my driving behavior and be more aware when I enter the little village of Dickerson.
well, the worst one is the work areas, when you're outside and going down, and they're saying, work area, and snap, and it's funny, because people have said to me, you know what? No, they just do that. They'll say work area, whatever.
Well, to say photo
Yeah, you
enforcement,
can-
sometimes
you
they
can
have them out there, and sometimes they
You
don't.
can see the cameras, like on Frederick at I-70, when they had that.
And I think, too, putting up signs to make sure the public knows that, cameras are being used to enforce, stopping at red lights or.
And it catches you, I mean, it really does, especially at the schools. When you see those signs, you know. Yeah.
Well, again, data-based, hardship intersections, and rather than just putting them generally around, I think we're willing to look at it.
All right. I'll bring
Thanks,
something back
Chief.
to you. Thank you.
Any desire to continue the discussion on the proposed sources of revenue that were documented? We still
Yeah, I'd
have.
like to ask Michelle a question.
Sure.
Michelle, in part, and I want this to be very clear to the council and to the public, and in part, the issues that we're facing in terms of having enough money to make the city work are related to the fact that the state of Maryland cut us pretty badly at some point. Isn't that correct? When the recession started about 2008 or 9, I can't remember, didn't the state of Maryland just take away a lot of the money, or at least a good bit of the money they had been sending us for various programs? Do you have any recollection of those numbers?
Well, it was
The
police
answer-
aid and about 90% of highway user revenues.
Yes. And I think right now, we got a memo that said for fiscal year 15, approximately about 340 grand maybe, that we could get for fiscal year 15 compared to, I think like fiscal year 09, we were a little over $1 million.
Yeah.
The loss in 2009 in state revenue was about 2.4 million.
2.4 million we lost. And there were no,
Roughly.
and there were no
That was-
tax increases.
That was primarily highway user revenue and police
Police.
protection.
And there was no tax increases to make up for them in the city.
Right.
So the city's been operating with that loss,
That
and
earned
and others,
council-
and others since then.
Highway user revenue was largely restored, I believe, and not highway user revenue, the police. Highway user revenue was about 45, 50% restored, I believe. So we're still down. not
Right,
quite as
it's
much.
still down considerably, actually.
There's a section in our budget book. If you go to like the general fund section, there's a little snapshot of just the state and county shared tax revenues. And there's a little graph there that you can actually see. We show fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 14, and you're going to see an increase from 13 to 14 because of some of the restoration in the police aid.
Can you tell us what page that's on?
Page 9, but we also referenced there and referenced that we saw a decrease of approximately 1.8 million just in highway user revenue.
It's a pretty big hit.
Yes.
It is.
Well,
And our constituents aren't reading the books, but they are looking at the TV.
Again, some of that highway user revenue from the original budget was restored by the General Assembly. And probably for the next year it will be. The difficulty is it was not incorporated into the gas tax legislation, so it's a one-off, one-time, year-by-year administration thing, and they make you crawl through all kinds of things to keep that in force, they hold that out there. But it's not, it's not guaranteed whatsoever, so it is an issue, Don. I agree with you on that.
The other thing we've
We're
done-
in jeopardy constantly on that.
The other thing we've done to lessen the blow on the operating budget from fluctuations in highway user revenue, because it has fluctuated to some extent over the years, never as dramatically as the decrease in 2009, as we've shifted it as a revenue of the general operations to the city to revenues for pavement preservation, because it's so much easier for us to adjust on the capital side if we get hit by state revenue reductions than it is when it's mingled in with all our other general fund revenues.
Correct.
Well, that's a
And
practical
that's-
matter with 70% of our budget going to personnel. The only way to regulate it is to get rid of personnel, right? Almost.
That was one of the impacts that led to the
Right.
freezing of the wages.
Mr. Brubaker.
I guess I just have a general question, and maybe it's for next time if we're uncomfortable, but the largest increase in expenditures for FY, and I pointed this out when we did our budget review, was for debt service, and yet the capital expenditures don't jump until, and that takes place for FY15. But the capital expenditures are in FY15. Generally, the debt service, depending on what time of year it's issued, comes the subsequent year. So by this time, it's highly unlikely that our debt service expenditures will be, what they're projected to be, unless we decide to do MELP. We decide to do, the baseball stadium's already in here. If we decide to do MELP, if we decide to do the parking deck and take it out of general fund, or any of these others, that will once again drive up the capital program. But as a technical matter, I would say for next year that debt service hit is going to be substantially less. It's by far, it's larger than what we had for compensation. That's an item, and until we lock in or decide what we're going to do, I'm not saying it's money we can spend, but that combined with not knowing about the assessments creates a huge swing between what will the assessment thing be. That is 1.6 million down, and the debt service is up 1.2 million. So, to the extent that debt service is down, and if the assessment doesn't hit us as bad, we may have more funds to do other things, or at least balance the budget.
Well, I think one of the
You
challenges.
see where I'm going with the debt service? It generally follows in the following year was when that.
We do, and I think if we look at some of the estimates that we originally did and some of the timelines, we were thinking that the big projects like the stadium, that it was going to be started in fiscal year 14 and hope to be accomplished and finished.
But even here, it's in 15, and it seems that's, if that expenditure is ever made, that would be the absolute earliest it could be made.
Right,
You know.
And I think you're right. I
to
mean,
do one.
But then the debt service
variables-
follows in the subsequent year.
The variables are some of the projects you've described. We don't know in these projections what you want to do with MELP.
Right, which isn't in here.
Stormwater or downtown projects.
Right.
So those all come into play on the debt service side.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we backfill it with other expenditures, then we're there anyhow. you
Right.
know.
So it's a big variable for you as you look at 14, FY 15 and beyond.
I agree. I was hoping that, while we're certainly sitting here having this discussion as a body, there are a lot of folks that have an interest in this discussion, and while I certainly think we'll get to those topics, I think for the sake of public clarity, I'd like to stay on the task of these items in order.
I agree. I'm not saying I just want to point out that we have these huge swings, and I think that it's going to be, on both of them, we're going to know a lot more where we are at the end of the year. I'm not saying diverge from these revenue
Following
items.
up on Kristen's point, I didn't want to adjourn until 7 o'clock.
All right. For adjournment.
Just to clarify, 2 weeks we're back though, and just so staff can prepare, you want to continue on the revenue list with 4, which is utility dividend transfers, parking system user fees, water and wastewater fees, rate differential, 5-year rate schedule. So we'd have, those are the next 3 if you want to go through those.
Sure.
We can be ready beyond that if you want, but focus on those 3 on the 8th.
Seems like it worked well tonight.
Especially when you've got a general work session that day.
When's our next budget? When are you scheduling that?
Well, I think the council talked about every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So the 8th and then the 22nd.
Mike's
Mr.
got a
Spiker.
question.
We met with Municipal Financial Services today in regard to the 5-year rate study, and we gave them direction, and we have some work to do in the updates. We would like to actually discuss that in the work session of the 15th. I haven't spoken to Donnie yet, but we'd like to do a full presentation then and can probably cover the vast majority of the questions at that point in time.
So how about we move 7 to 6? How about we flip them? So we'll do utility tax rate next time as the 3rd item, and we'll move you guys to 2 weeks after that.
It
So-
would actually be 1 week in the regular, in the
But we're
in the
talking
work
about these
session.
items every 2 weeks.
Yes, sir.
So we'll do 4, 5, and
Okay.
old 7 on the 8th.
Okay.
And then bring in the
Thank you.
6 on the 15th.
All right, there's been a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Good evening, everybody. We're going to call this meeting to order. The invocation tonight will be led by Mr. Metzner, and following that, we will have the pledge to the flag. If everybody would please stand.
We gather together here today, intent on doing good work. We seek to represent fairly and well those who have given us this task. May our efforts be blessed with insight, guided by understanding and wisdom. We seek to serve with respect for all. May our personal faiths give us strength to act honestly and well in all matters before us. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The first item on our agenda is new business. and this is an amendment to our rules of procedure. I would like to note that based on some feedback I got from other council members, if we turn to page 5, under the rules, the order of business, currently it says number 7 is citizen comments, number 8, administrators' comments, 9, mayor and council comments, and then 10, public hearings. I think it was Councilmember Brubaker who suggested that our comments would be better served following the citizen comments and the public hearings, so that if anything is mentioned during either of those, that we might be able to respond to that. And the reason why we're making this change is because I believe it was in the previous administration or an administration prior to that, that moved citizen comments from the end of the meeting toward the beginning, because we know how busy everybody is, and we didn't want to have to make you stay through our whole business meeting to get to make comments. Although we would love for everybody to stay for our whole entire meeting, that was the purpose. But at our last regular session, because there was such a lengthy agenda and because of our later starting time, we had no more citizens in the audience to respond to their comments, and even the media had left. So that is the reason why I proposed the change. And if it is acceptable to the rest of the council, I think the proper order should be to have citizen comments, public hearings, have the administrator comments follow that, and then mayor and council comments. Is that
So move to amend the rules.
all right?
Second?
There's a motion and a second to go forward with the proposed amendments. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the change of order of business, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. Next item, we have some announcements. Obviously, we're operating under our rules of procedure that we just amended and adopted. Use of cell phones during the meetings is restricted. All correspondence for distribution to elected officials should be provided to the city clerk and should include a copy for the city clerk for inclusion in the official record. And just so everyone knows, the upcoming meeting schedule, Tuesday the 1st, we'll have a work session at 4 o'clock, as well as on Tuesday the 8th and the 15th, work sessions at 4 o'clock. And our regular session will be Tuesday, October 22nd. And if it's okay with everybody right now, I think we could go ahead and decide not to have a meeting on the 29th of October.
That's fine with me.
Okay. Tonight we have some guests here to receive a proclamation, and I'd like to invite them forward at this time. This is Economic Development Week, September 30th through October 4th. Joining me here in the front are our trusty city staff, Jill Estavillo, Andrew Sargent, our downtown manager and economic development manager. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read this. This is a proclamation to celebrate Economic Development Week, September 30th through October 4th, 2013. Whereas the City of Hagerstown's Office of Economic Development is an active member of the Maryland Economic Development Association, or MEDA, a nonprofit organization established in 1961 whose mission is to enhance the knowledge and skills of its members and to encourage partnerships and networking among those committed to bringing jobs and investment to Maryland. And whereas MEDA members promote the economic well-being of Maryland by working to improve the state's business climate and professionalism of those who in the field of economic development, including professionals with an interest in the economy of Maryland, and through its regular meetings, special programs, and projects, members address diverse issues. And whereas economic growth and stability of the state affects all regions and jurisdictions in Maryland, and the City of Hagerstown is an important component of the state's economic success, now therefore I, David Gysberts, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, do hereby proclaim the week of September 30th through October 4th, 2013 as Economic Development Week in Hagerstown, Maryland, and encourage all citizens to recognize and reaffirm the importance of business development locally and statewide. And may I add that if you haven't been to downtown Hagerstown recently, I highly encourage you to come downtown and rediscover all the good things that are happening here as a result, mainly of a lot of hard work that these two people standing in front of you have been doing. So I'd like to present this to both of you. And also, after we take our picture here, I want you to talk about the event that's happening tomorrow.
Oh, sure.
Get closer, And you guys will have to fight over whose office this gets to be. One for fate. Oh, sorry. Okay. And since, Jill, you're closer to my microphone, do you want to talk about?
I'm going to have Andrew,
Oh,
because it's
Andrew.
a downtown event.
So tomorrow is, we're hosting an event, part of a collaborative effort to host an event called Startup Maryland. Tomorrow morning at 8:30, or possibly quite a little bit before then, the Maryland Pitch Bus is rolling into the parking lot over here at the Elizabeth Hager Center. On that bus, startup businesses, entrepreneurs can give their pitch, their elevator speech, or 3-minute pitch to investors to try to gain some investment and support for their product, their idea, their business. Those videos will then be professionally produced and given back to them for use on Facebook and other social media outlets to try to promote their business. While that's going on, there are a number of seminars and workshops that are happening throughout the morning and afternoon, including a social media seminar for startup businesses, kind of starting a Facebook page for your business and how to maximize that. So lots of little small business entrepreneurial things happening out in the Elizabeth Hager parking lot tomorrow morning.
And do people need to sign up in advance, or can they sign up on the spot?
On the spot, I think that the bus slots, the pitch bus slots are full. Antietam Cable is actually helping us out and doing some additional videotaping of other pitches, so we're able to accommodate more people. And then, but otherwise, just kind of stop by and pick up a brochure of the seminars and pick one that would be helpful to you. So.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much for collaborating with the county EDC on making that happen, and with the folks at the state. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And you said there are no folks here for the public hearing? No one signed up. Okay. Our next agenda item is citizen comments. The first person to sign up, well, first let me say, citizen comments are limited to 5 minutes per individual. Meetings are televised and recorded, and your comments will be on air and on tape and on YouTube. So, and we would ask that you refrain from making personal attacks against any individual. Nate, is it Stewer? Stoyer. Nate, come on up. Yes, to the podium, and if you don't mind stating your name and address, please.
Nate Stoyer. I live in Hedgesville, West Virginia. I'd like to thank the mayor and the council for allowing me to speak regarding the repeal to Chapter 155 regarding noise control. I'm a concerned citizen who strongly opposes the updates to the noise ordinances proposed. On June 8th, my council, the American Foundation, sent a letter to Mr. Narn, I hope I got that right, outlining the unconstitutionality of the current ordinance as written. It is very vague, overreaching, and subjective. If any of the council members would like to have copies of the letter, both to the attorney as well as back, I've got copies of those and the ordinance as well. Both the federal and Supreme Courts have ruled again and again the constitutional right of amplified free speech. There are many cases outlined in that letter. The American Foundation has successfully worked with numerous cities to amend their noise ordinances within the confines of the law, protecting the free speech rights of their citizens. The letter they sent Mr. Narn clearly outlined the many issues with both the current and proposed ordinance. These issues have been challenged by the American Foundation in numerous cities and successfully won in both federal and Supreme Courts across the country. The current and proposed noise ordinances are unconstitutional. And I'll give you an example. Under the current and proposed ordinances, a lawnmower and a cell phone have more rights than a human being does in free speech. A lawnmower and a cell phone are actually exempt, but yet if someone engages in free speech at a 50-foot level right now, it's a violation. So my question to the council is, do you really believe that free speech is less valuable than having your lawn cut or your cell phone going off? I'm very concerned that if this proposed ordinance is passed as it is written, it will squelch the amplified free speech rights citizens have under the First Amendment, and the First Amendment is valuable and we need to protect our rights. I'm here to speak on behalf of those who would exercise their amplified free speech rights when it comes to politics, religion, education, homosexual rights, and whatever they want to speak about. This proposed amendment does not allow for spontaneous times of free speech, and under this proposal, someone exercising their spontaneous amplified free speech right would be in violation because they did not acquire a permit 5 days in advance. This is a prior restraint on a person's rights and is unconstitutional. Neither I nor the American Foundation want to see this escalated into a legal battle, and that's why I'm here speaking with you in person. The federal courts recently have sided with the American Foundation and the city of Winchester, Virginia on this exact same issue. The city adopted an ordinance which was laid out and sent to the city attorney, and we would suggest that this city also takes a long, hard look at that ordinance because we would have no issues with that at all and you'd never see me again. This ordinance clearly defines time of day, decibel rating, and distance. If you think about it, if you're driving down the road and an officer pulls you over and says, you were going very, very fast, you would say, yes, officer, how fast was I going? I don't know, you were going very, very fast. I don't have a meter to gauge that by. That's ludicrous. No one in this room would want an officer to do that. So why would someone, exercising their free speech rights, want an officer to dictate by his standard, I think you were too loud, while the next officer says, I think he was fine? So part of policing is gauging potential infractions by taking precise measurements. Just like the police use those radar guns now to show proof of speeding infraction, the measurement of sound is no different. Without an accurate measurement, it becomes an unfettered discretion on the officer's part. Officers can be easily trained to use this device. They're very inexpensive, and it makes sure that everyone's in check. So all we are asking is that the council would adopt a time and day standard, decibel at 100 feet or at any given level, ordinance plus ambient. You can, again, go back to the letters that were given to sent to Mr. Narn in regards to this. No permit would be required because these parameters would be set and laid out very clearly, so anyone using their free speech rights would know that, and if the officer comes out at the 100-foot level and it exceeds that decibel rating, they know that they would be in violation. The numerous cases that are outlined in the letter that are specific to free speech rights, again, were fought in both federal and Supreme Courts, and time again they were won. Should this council decide not to adopt the suggested ordinance from the American Foundation, the city will be opening itself up to further challenges and there will be a legal battle. Let me clearly state, we do not want this. We simply want the amplified free speech rights of individuals protected under the First Amendment, as both the federal and Supreme Courts have agreed upon and ruled on time and time again. I request that the council takes another long, hard look at the ordinance the city of Winchester has adopted, as well as many other cities that were challenged, and rewrite the Hagerstown noise ordinance based on it. We will have no reason to further challenge the city on this issue if the council adopts what was proposed by the American Foundation. Again, if you'd like a copy of these letters or this ordinance, I'd be glad to provide it for you. I have them here if anyone wants one. And I do thank you for your time and consideration in this matter.
I suggest you give them to the city clerk.
Okay, I don't know procedure, so I'll go ahead.
And
do
what's
that.
the American Foundation, what's the full name of that organization?
American Foundation for Freedom and Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next person signed up to speak is Nancy McHenry. Nancy, come on up. Welcome. If you don't mind stating your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Nancy McHenry, and I live at 7 East Washington Street, apartment 206, Hagerstown, Maryland. I'm not going to be able to talk as well as he just did. I'm just me, and I'm not used to talking in front of people. But since I have moved into the Alexander House due to physical conditions that I'm suffering, I have a great concern for handicap parking. There are no handicap spaces. You can say there is, but there isn't. There's 2 that's by the convention center. There are 2 that are across the street from the Alexander House. And there are 4 that are down the street from the pawn shop. Well, if you look at me, you would probably think, she's fine, there's nothing wrong with her, no problem. But I'm not. I cannot carry my groceries that far. I can't do it. There are other people in wheelchairs who cannot do it. There are no handicap parking spaces at all in front of the Alexander House. And I know for a fact that if you would park your car in front of the Alexander House, say you have a lot of groceries, you've got to go inside, get a cart. Sometimes there are no carts. Sometimes people have to go all the way up to the 10th floor to put their groceries away, come back down, get the rest of them, take them back up, and they have gotten tickets. This has become a great concern. I've seen many people that are in worse shape than me. I have no use of this hand anymore. And I have seen people in worse shape than me, and my heart goes out to them. What is the purpose of having a handicap tag if you can't park in a regular parking space? And you have to fight to find a handicapped parking space. And people say, come downtown. Yes, there are a lot of things going on downtown. Downtown has changed. It truly has, because I live right there on the square. But there's no handicap places for these people to park. So something needs to be done. Like I said, I can't carry my groceries from down at the pawn shop. I can't do it. If I can't do it, other people can't do it. There's people a lot older than me and a lot worse than me. And I just felt that I needed to speak out on behalf of these people and myself as my health deteriorates. And I hope that you take into consideration and you take a look and you see that there really isn't any handicapped places to park for these people. I appreciate you listening, and thank you.
Thank you for bringing that important issue to our attention.
Thank you.
And you know, I don't know if you know, but last week we heard from the potential purchaser of that building. And I don't know if you've ever addressed this issue with the ownership or the management of the, what have they said? What's their response?
They said that I needed to go out to MVA, and that MVA would give me a special sign with a number on it. Well, when you live on $185 a month until your Social Security comes through, you can't do that. There's no way. There's a fee. I have no money. I'm used to making $2,000 a month, and now I'm making $185 a month until my Social Security comes through. So there is no answer for me, and I can't afford to keep putting change in the meters. And you know, some people have even been smart and said, "We'll sell your car." Well, how am I going to get to the doctors? How am I going to get to the specialist and the grocery store? And you know, there's a lot of ifs with that. But if you guys just ever have a pretty day and you just take a walk, you'll see what I'm talking about, that there just is no places close to the Alexander House for these people. So.
May I ask what the fee is for the handicap placard? Because that is a real solution. You don't even have to get plates, you can get a placard.
Well, the placard is free. The placard is free. I have a placard. But what good is the placard when you can't find a handicap parking space? And you can't park in a regular parking space because you get a ticket. It has to be a handicapped parking
You have to feed
space.
the meter for handicap space also.
Beg your pardon?
You have to feed the meter for a handicap
Yes,
space.
exactly. So that was my point. I can't afford to feed the meter.
Is there a loading or unloading zone there in front of the Alexander House?
There's a 15-minute one. But a lot of these people are in
Sure. Will take
wheelchairs,
15
and
minutes.
it takes
Sure.
a lot longer than that to,
Well, it is a tough issue, and especially with that building having 95 units in it, many people being elderly or disabled, it does create an issue. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
and I don't know if there's an answer or not, but
Mm-hmm.
just to have somebody listen and see what they can do means a lot to somebody.
The Alexander House, I didn't catch this. You said there were 2 spaces here and 2 there and 4 at another place. Are there any on the Alexander House property?
None,
There's 0. How many?
absolutely none.
But they do have parking on the property.
Yes, but it's,
For the TV station.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, if I
Yes.
may, because there was a gentleman from down at the Alexander House that had caught me early on, and that was back in March. And I know that I had gone to Eric Dykey, and I had addressed it with him because of Central Lot, okay, as there being more handicap accessible parking areas. And I was told it couldn't happen. And I mean, you know, that's where I was at.
Well, in terms of the number of required spaces, the city meets all the requirements that is required by the ADA, by the law. But it is an important issue, but I think if there's a change in ownership, perhaps we can work with the new owner to work out some kind of way to accommodate folks who need it.
Even if just across the street where the only 2 parking spaces are, if there could just be a few more. You know, it would give people a chance to hurry up and put their stuff inside and then go park the cars and walk back over. But when sometimes it's not always safe to just leave your stuff sitting there and go park your car, because when you come back, your stuff's not going to be sitting there. So most people run it up to their apartments. When they get back downstairs, they have to run up the next load, and then by that time, usually a lot of people have a warning or a ticket. So, but I just appreciate you listening and making this easy for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. You're welcome anytime. Next person on the list, Robert Stauffer. Mr. Stauffer, the husband of the esteemed retired teacher, Mrs. Linda Stauffer, who taught me 3 years in high school. My favorite teacher in the world, I have to say.
She couldn't have done anything any better with her professional career than do what she did. And I was grateful, except that she had to work all weekend, like most English teachers do. My name is Robert Stauffer, 1334 Woodland Way, and this is started out as being a personal matter, but I think it's more general. I believe that a 24 to 30 inch diameter maple tree that was on our property was cut down by the city of Hagerstown. Probably because it's near the wires. It's in the back of the house, back by the alley. And we just had it trimmed professionally, along with another tree on the property this spring. It was weight reduced and cut away. While they did that, my wife's wildflower garden is right beside it. And it was a successful wildflower garden, about 12 feet by 6 feet, and it was in full bloom, about 5 feet high. And the vehicle or the detritus from the tree were placed on the wildflower garden. And I wanted to bring that to your attention. We didn't know that you were going to be in our backyard. And you may have the, the written authority to go into my backyard and cut down the tree. But I thought it was inconsiderate behavior. I also believe that the removal of the tree may have been unnecessary. So I guess I should ask you for something, and that would be, I'd like for somebody in the chain of responsibility to speak with my wife and I and tell me why both of those things had to be done. And I think it's a reasonable request.
So you're saying you did not receive prior notice that the
No.
tree would be cut?
No. And, to be fair about it, it would probably take two surveyors, one from one company, one from another company, arguing for a week to determine whose if it's on our property
Right.
or if it was on the alley property. But we had maintained it as if it was on ours.
I know that there's a paper alley, I think, or a right-of-way that the city maintains. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the actual alley.
Was
Okay.
The back of our yard backs up to an alley.
Okay.
Was the alley, was it risen by any chance? Was there a raise in the alley?
Yes.
Okay, well, I had the same situation that I got a call from off of Maryland Avenue, and I was told, again, and Mike, it would not have been your department, okay? I was told because of the rise in the alley, that the tree had to be taken down. This tree was a walnut tree, and it spanned over three homes, and there were neighbors that were very upset about it, but I couldn't do anything. That's what they told me. It was because it was the alley, and the alley, I sympathize, I really do,
And
because...
I'm just asking, do you know for a fact it was the city that cut it down?
The city would have had Antietam to cut it down. That's what
Yes.
happened on Maryland Avenue.
Yes.
City comes out
I
to survey
believe,
first.
When I wrote this thing that I didn't look at, it may have been your subcontractor, a subcontractor. And I've already removed deep ruts from my backyard, from subcontractor coming in and cutting things away. And it is difficult for the big vehicles to get up and down our alley. But I know from heating with wood in college for 6 years that that tree can be removed without putting it on something that you don't want it on. So I thought it was inconsiderate behavior, and that's my comment.
Sure.
Look into
I
and
certainly
get back
think
to
we
Ms.
will look
Cooper.
into it and get back to you.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thanks very much. And if it's happening to me, I'm sure it's happening to others.
Well, I think we heard from...
Mr. Stalford, let me just say, you've come to the right place, and the people have heard you, the people in the chain of command.
All right.
Someone will be in touch with you
Thank you very much.
to discuss it with you.
Tell Mrs. Stauffer I said hi.
Thank you very much.
There are no other people signed up for citizen comments. Is there anyone that would like to? Please, come on up. If you don't mind just stating your name and address for the record when you get up there.
I'm Dot Klein. I live at 1036 Benjamin Place. And one of my favorite places in Hagerstown is the city park. And I usually try to walk there every day. And a couple weeks ago, I was going up the alleyway to the park, and I saw a sign, and I thought, I'll look at it the next time I go by. So the next day when I went by, the sign said, "Welcome." And it was welcome dogs. And it had a list of what dogs could do in the park, what the owners were supposed to do. And then it had Humane Society, and underneath of that was the city's number and the Park Service number. Now, a few years back, this council brought up the fact that dogs should be allowed in the park, and I thought I was going to have a hassle then, but it died down, and there was a small sign saying no dogs allowed until this recent sign went up. Well, I'm a taxpayer, and I didn't complain when you all decided to do a park for the dogs to walk in and to play in. But now you're interfering in the city park. People that take their dogs to the park, a lot of them, I'd say 50% of them, let the dogs dump and they don't pick it up. And even if you tell them, and I have stopped doing that because I can't run as fast now if somebody turns on me and tells me to mind my own business. Well, I'd like to know who put that sign up and why the Humane Society can put a sign up like that. I don't think dogs should be allowed in the park. They can walk around the park, the circle around the park where a lot of people jog, but
I believe that that's still the case.
Pardon?
That dogs are not permitted inside the park,
Not inside.
but they are permitted around the outside of the park, like you're
that's not
describing.
what the sign says. The signs are about that big.
I know which signs you're talking, because they've been installed in many parks throughout Hagerstown, the very same sign. And I think the Humane Society is on there. It's animal control, I think, is the number that's on there in case there is a problem with people not following
Well, now
control laws.
there's more dogs, there's more people walking their dogs in the park.
I agree. We were at the
Sunday,
park
I
last
walked-
week, and my wife asked me, she said, I didn't know dogs were allowed in the park. And my answer was, I didn't either. I think the young lady's very correct about dogs are suddenly appearing in City Park, and I don't know what the signs say, but I think we ought to address it.
When it could be confusing people if the sign is on the perimeter of the park, they may be thinking that now dogs are allowed inside the park, and perhaps we need to look at that and
Why don't we
clarify.
take a look and see
Well,
what's
this has
going
been the
on.
past few weeks.
Mhm.
And since this Sunday, when I went out there early to walk, I was coming down past the museum, and I looked down and I thought, well, there's my first case. Come an old gentleman walking two dogs, but before I got down to where he turned off and went up to the parking area there, but now I carry pepper spray, and I take my cane all the time, and I won't move if somebody's bringing their dog. I'm not going to move off of the sidewalk, and I'm going to use pepper spray if I have to. But I think it's very wrong to have dogs. If people would do what they're supposed to do and pick up after they dump and keep them from digging up the park, that's fine. But I just wanted to complain about those signs and about dogs being in the park when they have their own park now. So people should take them to the dog park.
Ma'am, exactly where is the sign that you're referring to?
Pardon?
Exactly where is the sign you're referring to?
Well, you know where, I don't know what.
Is it right up the hill from the Hager house? Is that, and on that side of the park or on the south side of the park?
If you're going down Virginia Avenue and you make a turn to go up that's an alley, I guess. It's paved, and then the next street is Highland Way.
Okay.
The sign's there,
Okay.
and then down at the entrance to the park where,
Near the circle?
near the circle, and then there's another one, and then there's one up at the hill, up at the top of the hill.
Okay.
So,
Well, we'll certainly follow up with staff and make sure that the signs aren't confusing people and make sure everybody is aware of what the rules are there. And I agree, the best thing to do for everybody would just be to follow the rules, pick up after their dog, and there wouldn't be any problems. But I believe that it's probably a matter of the sign is a new sign. I know what
It
sign
is
you're talking
new.
about, and it's because it's located in many parks around the city. But I know I know for a fact that dogs are not allowed inside City Park. They are only allowed on the perimeter. So it could be that the sign is confusing people and making them think that they are actually allowed in the park now.
No,
So
I
we'll
think-
definitely look into it. And again, it's one of those things where if we don't know about it, we can't do anything about it. So I appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Don't run away yet. Mayor, I would like to point out too that I go to the Sunday night concerts out there, and we had an incident not long ago where there was seemed to be a very vicious dog And the dog got really excited at one of the concerts one night and had to be dragged out of the place. So she points out a very important problem. That
Well, I think
needs
there's
to
a
be
number of
resolved.
reasons why dogs aren't allowed inside the park, and
But
I think that's one.
I wanted to make another comment too. You're looking at a lady who is really an unsung hero of the park. Back when Steve Seger was mayor of Hagerstown, there was an old manufacturing plant in the area, the new area or newer area that's now used to park cars for the museum. It's near the Veterans Memorial there. It's been recently had macadam put on it, and it was an old manufacturing plant that had been there for probably 100 years, and it was an eyesore. It was a terrible eyesore, and in addition to that being an eyesore, it had contaminated the ground in the park in much the same way that other areas of Hagerstown are contaminated for manufacturing. And Dot got the idea all those weeks ago, years ago, that this building ought to come down and that should be a parking area for the museum, because there was never enough parking for the museum. And she came to me in a previous life, and she and Mayor Seger and I and some other people from the state and others worked very hard to get that building torn down, and make that into a parking place.
Well,
But
that was because you helped and Bob McGinnis helped to get parking there for the museum. And that was one of the things that you never marketed yourself. You did a lot of things like that never got in the paper. But we, the people, know you did.
Well,
so
but it was
I
your
think-
idea, and if you had never suggested it, it would have never happened. So,
Well,
it's good
thanks
to
for
see you,
being an
Dot.
engaged citizen, Ms. Klein. Anyone else? Yes, sir, please, come on up. If you don't mind stating your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Buddy King. I live 14 Holder Court in Boonesboro, here in Washington County. First, I apologize. I didn't know that you needed to sign up, and so thank you for hearing me. And I'll be brief. I am here in opposition to the revision to the noise ordinance that Mr. Stoyer spoke on. So I don't need to rehash all that. I just wanted to make a showing of a representative of a Washington County resident that does frequent Hagerstown. So I hold the same opinion as Mr. Stoyer, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay, last call. Anyone else like to make any comments? Okay, we'll move along then to the public hearing. We have a public hearing tonight on the Community Development Block Grant for fiscal year 2013, the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, otherwise known as CAPER. Mr. Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening to Mr. Mayor and the members of the City Council. The purpose of this public hearing is to provide an opportunity for interested citizens to comment on the City of Hagerstown's Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, also known as the CAPER. Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG regulations, require the city to submit the CAPER to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, commonly referred to as HUD, at the end of each CDBG program year. The CAPER is used to meet three basic purposes. It provides HUD with the information necessary to assess a grantee's ability to carry out the CDBG program in compliance with applicable regulations. It provides information for HUD to report to Congress, and it provides grantees with an opportunity to describe its program achievements with their citizens. The fiscal year 2013 CAPER provides details on Hagerstown's CDBG program for the reporting period from July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013. CDBG expenditures for the period totaled $1,499,000, and excluding general administration and planning costs, the amount expended on projects totaled $1,318,000. Of this total, $947,000, or 72%, went to activities directly benefiting low and moderate income persons. Hagerstown's CDBG activities are carried out to help improve the quality of life for residents in the city and enhance city neighborhoods. Activities included the homeownership incentive programs, housing rehabilitation programs, public service programs, new public facilities, and public facility improvements. In fiscal year 2013, a total of $646,000 in CDBG funds were expended on various housing activities. These activities include residential rehabilitation programs, down payment assistance programs, and city property rehabilitation. In fiscal year 2013, $546,000 in CDBG funds were expended on public facilities and commercial property improvements. The projects assisted during the reporting period include handicap-accessible curb ramps constructed at various locations throughout the city, construction of Memorial Park, Potterfield pool improvements, and Hagerstown Small Business Center renovations, also known as 60 West Washington Street or the old CVS. $125,000 in CDBG funds were used by 5 nonprofit agencies and 1 City of Hagerstown program to provide services to approximately 2,000 low and moderate income citizens during fiscal year 2013. The agencies receiving assistance were Girls Incorporated, Senior Living Alternatives, Children in Need, the Community Free Clinic, the Community Action Council, and the Wheaton Park Summer Program through the City of Hagerstown. CDBG regulations require that entitlement communities expend at least 70% of their CDBG funds on activities that benefit low and moderate income persons. Communities have the choice of assuring this is accomplished by executing 1-, 2-, or 3-year reporting periods. Because of the flexibility that it provides, Hagerstown has chosen the 3-year reporting period. As mentioned previously, low and moderate income spending for this year was 72%. In fiscal year 2013 is the second year of the 3-year reporting period. CDBG regulations require that an entitlement community expend no more than 15% of the current year's entitlement plus the previous year's program income on public service expenditures. During the reporting period, Hagerstown expended 14.9% of its CDBG funds on public service activities. CDB regulations also require that an entitlement community expend no more than 20% of the current year's entitlement plus the current year's program income on general program administration. During the reporting period, Hagerstown expended 19% of its CDBG funds on general program administration. Prior to submitting the CAPER to HUD, the city must make the report available for public review and comment. A copy of the CAPER has been available for review at the Department of Community and Economic Development Office and on the city's website since September 10, 2013. Comments will continue to be received until September 25, 2013. And this concludes staff comments.
Thank you. And as the clerk mentioned earlier, there is nobody signed up to speak at the public hearing at this time, but I would entertain a motion to keep the record open.
So moved.
For 10 days?
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Record will be open for 10 days. If anyone wants to make any comments about the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report regarding Community Development Block Grant Funds. And with that, we'll conclude the public hearing, and we will go into city administrator comments.
None for me this evening.
All right, council comments. We'll start with Ms. Nye today.
I knew that. The remembrance at Rose Hill Cemetery was absolutely wonderful. And I just want to say again, thanks to Steve Bachmiller as well as staff being able to get this and pull it all together. I would just like to see in the future, if there's anything else that's going to be going on, that we do some type of advertising. It was attended, but for all of Washington County, there certainly should have been much more there. So I don't know what we do with our advertising, what we do on Channel 25, because quite honestly, I don't watch Channel 25. But we need to get it out. This is, again, our history and what has gone on in this county and in this city.
I think the weather scared a lot of people away since it was threatening rain, but you're right.
If you are truly,
That's right. I
okay,
agree.
you
I
would
know.
have been there.
And it was a fantastic event, you're right.
Right. And then also the firefighters having their medal awards was quite amazing, too. That's it.
Mr. Munson.
I think I'd like to say ditto to Penny's comments. Saturday was a great day, but I would like to thank Steve Bachmiller for the writing and the booklet that he did as part of the ceremony on Saturday morning at Rose Hill. It was extraordinarily good piece of work, and Steve can really be proud of that, and we can, as representatives of the city of Hagerstown, we can be proud of his efforts as a city employee, since he is a city employee, of a really good piece of work. Thank you, Mayor.
Absolutely. Mr. Metzner.
I concur with what's been said.
Okay, Mr. Brubaker.
Yes, First of all, I'd like to thank the many, I think 75 to 100 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on Mount Etna Road for cleaning up not only the site around the Hager House, the site in the stream, but also for revamping the garden, for cleaning the house, for cleaning some of the house contents, and performing many other jobs on the site and in the house on Saturday morning with that same threatening weather hovering over. But, the work they performed was above and beyond expectations and really has helped us out and helped keep one of our city keepsakes in great condition. I, too, want to endorse the remarks about the Rose Hill Remembrance, thank the staff that worked on it, and I wish more citizens could have turned out, and some of that may have been the prior publicity. I understand some things were submitted to local media and didn't get attention. And then finally, I want to thank Kristen and his group for cleaning up the Antietam Creek, which on Saturday morning, again in that same dismal weather, he couldn't make the remembrance. We've all told him about it, but cleaning up our waterways is and also a great volunteer thing. So thanks.
Mr. Alshire.
A couple of things. First is we had our coalition, I think our fourth coalition meeting last week, and one of the bright spots I think to come out of that, I think we got an email of a bit of even more recent news today, was some attention by the state to I-81 corridor expansion efforts and the bridge across the Potomac, which isn't, a strictly city-related item and isn't, arguably a remotely city item, but I think it's an important item to this county and certainly to the greater hub area of the city. And I think our efforts as a coalition to solidify around that and the state's attention to the issue, I think bodes well for the community because, to me, it's a two-faced item, partly because it is clearly a safety issue as that road continues to receive increased traffic. And the second, it's clearly an economic development issue. So, I think those are good things, and that, I hope, is one of the bigger items we take down to the state as a coalition this year as sort of a collective community push. The other item is I did respond to Antietam Cable's folks, in relation to the broadband efforts by the city, and I would simply encourage the rest of the mayor and council to reach out to some of these other private groups to get an understanding of sort of their perspective on where we're at with that issue and where we're going with it. I think it's good to hear from all parties sort of at the table and understand and reach some compromise, as we move forward for the collective good. The next item is, I'm sure the mayor will probably touch on this, so I'll just touch briefly, is the Neighborhoods First picnic that we had at Pangbourne Park. I think that's one of those things, as Penny would say, it was not overly well attended. Probably should be more people there, but the folks that were there, it was great. And Pangbourne Park's one of, I think, my favorite parks to go to, even though we don't live close by. It's good to go up there because it's great for the kids and the pond and things. The next item is the creek cleanup that we did, the Antietam Creek Watershed Alliance. We cleaned the creek for about 5 hours on Saturday. I think we pulled a little over 100 tires out, which is probably a little above average for the 8 years that we've been doing it. And probably 1,000 pounds or so of metal and probably about 100 bags of plastic bottles. So I just say that to remind folks to be cognizant of what they do out there in the environment when they're using the plastic bottles and things. You would be amazed at sort of the islands of plastic bottles that created along the creek between basically the Sun Stadium and the Funkstown fire station that folks just never see because they're out of sight, out of mind. And the last item is I did reach out to and was offered to attend the Downtown Alliance meeting last week. It went very well. I think with the stadium, I think we got off to a bit of a wrong foot, if you will, and I think it was good to go to that meeting and reach out to folks. What I explained at that meeting and sort of solidified there and wanted to share with Mayor and Council is similar to what I've been saying for the past several months, and that is, what I sent folks back in May with those sort of 5 sort of, umbrella goals, if you will, and I think that we've been heading in some of that direction, whether it's on MELP or the budget or, residential initiatives or downtown, goal setting. For me, that's sort of the game plan that I've worked from, coming into office. And what I said is, I showed them the black book that I carry around, and it sort of has those 5 or 6 items in it, and it's sort of the playbook that I work from. And so that's, I guess, over the last 9 months, what I've seen this council sort of, evolve into is having sort of that, that game plan that has been solidifying around a number of those major initiatives and having a playbook, so to speak, to move forward with. And I think it gives our citizens, good understanding and our staff good understanding of the direction that we're headed in on those major items. So.
Thank you. There is always so much great stuff happening in Hagerstown, and I'm going to run through this list of things, and many of them have been mentioned already. We did have a grand opening last week. It's the Wayera Vinegar and Oil Tasting Gallery. So if you haven't heard of that, I really encourage you to check it out. It's in the Long Meadow Shopping Center, back in the little nook where the Port City Java is. There are flavors of vinegar and oil you've probably never even conceived, but it's great to be able to taste those and maybe even buy some and take it home. I do want to thank the Antietam Creek Watershed Alliance for their 8th annual rubbish roundup. It's the 8th year in a row I still wasn't able to make it, and maybe one of these days, Councilmember Alshire and I will be able to hop in a boat and clean up a section of the creek together. It truly was an outstanding event on Saturday at Rose Hill Cemetery. I highly encourage everyone to go out and visit it if you couldn't make the event. 3 things occurred. We rededicated the Confederate Cemetery, which is a state veterans cemetery at Rose Hill. We rededicated, if you will, the grave of Jacob Wheaton, who was an African-American Hagerstown resident who we believe was the first African-American in the state of Maryland to vote. And his grave was refurbished and reset, which it's right by the fence along Potomac Avenue, and a historic marker was set right outside of the gate, or outside of the fence where his grave is. So I encourage you to check that out. And as well, we unveiled a new memorial to the Lions Post, which was part of the Grand Army of the Republic, that was just for African Americans, that was formed after the Civil War. So it was a dedication to honor the Civil War veterans who were African American. It was very well produced. Again, I think accolades go out to Steve Bachmiller, who probably spent a lot of his personal time putting together that program and doing research as he wants to, as he always does, and also Karen Giffen, who helped put that together. I want to thank them especially, along with all the city staff who played a part in that. Also, we did have the neighborhood's first picnic. It's always great to see people from different neighborhoods coming together. I think next year, though, we should do a mixer where people from the same neighborhoods don't all sit together, kind of force people from different neighborhoods to mix it up a little bit. I attended Northern Middle School today. I went back to my old stomping grounds and met with the 7th grade there. And I tell you what, no offense, Holly, but they asked some really tough questions. There's definitely some future journalists and maybe even government officials in the class, 7th grade class at Northern Middle. I want to thank Mrs. Shea and the rest of the team there for inviting me. I had a great time. Lex Gillette, a blind, completely blind Paralympian, will be in Hagerstown tomorrow at 28 South, I think from 5 to 7 p.m. So if you're interested in meeting him, come on out. And also Thunder in the Square is this Friday, and I encourage everyone to come out to that as well. Also last weekend I got to attend the opening of the Maryland Symphony Orchestra, and I just have to say that the sound was fantastic. You may recall that the City Council helped fund a new sound system for the Maryland Theater, and it couldn't have sounded better. And one last thing is that I just wanted to make the public aware that I have requested a meeting with members of the Board of Education. I propose that a minority of each body get together to discuss 4 issues in particular, and that will be the eventual reuse of Winter Street Elementary School, the Barbara Ingram School and Maryland Theater Cultural Arts Center project, the reuse of Commonwealth Avenue, and also addressing poverty and the achievement gap in Hagerstown. And my hope is that out of that smaller group, we may be able to come together in a joint meeting with some items of substance to take action on. So that is all the comments that I have. And with that, we will move into approval of the minutes.
Mr. Mayor, hereby move for approval of minutes as presented for the mayor and council meetings held on August 13th, 20th, 27th, 2013.
Motion made by Mr. Alshire and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the approval of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Takes us to our consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move that the consent agenda in its entirety be approved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Munson and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the approval of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. On to unfinished business. First item is approval of an ordinance for Hager's Crossing PUD amendment, West City Elementary School.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move that the mayor and city council adopt an ordinance for an amendment to the Hager's Crossing planned unit development, including the condition endorsed by the Planning Commission on property located at the northeast corner of Bartow Drive and Hager's Crossing Drive.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Brubaker and seconded by Mr. Munson. Any discussion?
I'd just like to make a comment. When Winter Street School, I knew was going to be going, and as well as Connicajig, who was having water problems as far as drinking water, I just could not understand why we could not have taken care of Connicajig as well as Winter Street School, that there really didn't seem to be that much of a problem. I can't vote for it because I hate to see another school taken out of the city. As far as the inner city where these children here, there's a lot of those who do have problems, and I just don't know how well they're going to adjust. Unfortunately, I don't think that there was enough time given to parents at Winter Street School to even go and speak at the board. So I can't say yes to it.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
The ordinance is approved. Next item, item B, the approval of an ordinance amending the City Code, Chapter 140 of the Land Management Code.
Mr. Mayor, hereby move that the mayor and city council adopt an ordinance to amend the code of the city of Hagerstown by deleting and repealing Chapter 140 Land Management Code, replacing said chapter with the new Chapter 140, which incorporates by reference the text of the chapter to be maintained as a separate document for the purpose of efficiency in the use of public resources.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Brubaker and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries and the ordinance is approved. Item C, under unfinished business, approval of an ordinance amending the Land Management Code of the City of Hagerstown in multiple sections.
Mayor, I hereby move that the mayor and city council adopt an ordinance to amend the Land Management Code as referenced in Chapter 140 of the Code of the City of Hagerstown. Multiple cleanup amendments are being made, in addition to revisions pertaining to car sales facility regulations, an update to the on-premise sign regulations, and provisions for retail establishment in the IR Industrial Restricted Zoning District.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Brubaker and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ordinance is approved. Next up, item D, the approval of an ordinance accepting the offer of conveyance of lands of Bowman Hollyhock LLC.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for the approval of an ordinance authorizing the acceptance of conveyance of property known as lands of Bowman Hollyhock LLC along the east side of Broad Fording Road. The property will be conveyed to the city of Hagerstown by the adjoining landowner to allow the widening of Broad Fording Road.
Second.
I heard Mr. Metzner first, so the motion was made by Mr. Munson and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ordinance is approved. Item E, unfinished business, approval of an ordinance accepting offer of conveyance of lands of 2003 Salem Avenue LLC.
Mr. Mayor, hereby move for the approval of an ordinance authorizing the acceptance of conveyance of property known as lands of 2003 Salem Avenue LLC along the east side of Broad Fording Road. The property will be conveyed to the city of Hagerstown by the adjoining landowner to allow the widening of Broad Fording Road.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Alshire and seconded by Mr. Munson. Any discussion? All those in favor of the ordinance, the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is approved. The ordinance is approved. Next up, item F, an ordinance approval to prohibit smoking in Hagerstown parks.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for the approval of an ordinance to amend Section 173-30 of the Code of the City of Hagerstown to prohibit smoking in the parks and playgrounds.
Second.
Motion made by Ms. Nye and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ordinance is approved. Next up, item G, the approval of an ordinance, acquisition of permanent drainage easement at 626 and 638 Young Avenue.
Mayor, hereby move to approve an ordinance to accept an offer of conveyance to the city of drainage easements from Rodney Turner and from Dean and Sharon Trovinger at 638 and 626 Young Avenue. These easements are being accepted so the city may correct an existing drainage problem at this location.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Brubaker and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is approved. Ordinance is approved. Item H, authorizing a 3-month extension to the Antietam Cable franchise agreement with Antietam Cable Television.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move that the attached ordinance be approved to authorize a 3-month extension of the cable television franchise agreement with Antietam Cable Television, Inc.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Munson and seconded by Mr. Alshire. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries and the ordinance is approved. That brings us to new business. The first item is item A, the introduction of an ordinance repealing the chapter of 155 noise and replacement with new chapter 155 noise control.
Mr. Mayor, hereby move for the mayor and city council introduce an ordinance to repeal chapter 155 noise and replace it with new chapter 155 noise control. This change is proposed for the following reasons. Number 1, old chapter 155 includes provisions which complicate enforcement of the ordinance. And number 2, staff need a better tool to protect the quality of life and public health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Hagerstown from excessive noise.
Second.
Mayor, I move the table. Listening to citizens' comments tonight and a review of this ordinance, I don't believe it passes constitutional muster either. I think the town of Funkstown is going through this in a very recent time frame, trying to pass a noise ordinance where the sheriff looked at it and said, I'm not enforcing that. It's unconstitutional, it can't be enforced. And I read this ordinance, which calls for, as the gentleman says, the main determination of whether the law has been broken is an officer saying I could hear it 100 feet away. I believe there are decibel issues that have to be addressed and objectivity that has to be addressed. At the very minimum, I would like to see the sheriff look at this document. I had significant conversations with him about the Funkstown noise ordinance, which they attempted to pass along with a loitering ordinance, which he also indicated very correctly so was very unconstitutional. Now, the other way to look at it is, for those in the audience tonight, this being an ordinance, this is an introduction.
Right.
So the passage of this tonight would not make this law.
Right.
Right.
And it can be amended.
Right.
But I just wanted to bring that out. We can proceed either by introducing it this way and then putting on a work session to amend, or by tabling it. But I do think we need to take another look at this and look at the information provided, because I am familiar with some of the problems that this apparently has.
Mr. Mayor, I'll second the councilman's motion, but I do want to make it clear in doing so.
I'm sorry, the motion to introduce the ordinance or to table?
Table.
Okay.
But in doing so, I want to make it very clear that this ordinance responds to a need in Hagerstown, and that we need, in the near, not too distant future, to move forward with this ordinance. So that's
Motion is
the reason
tabled.
for my
Well,
second.
we have to have a vote.
All in favor of tabling the ordinance, the introduction of the ordinance? Please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
I didn't hear Ms. Nye's vote. I heard 2 and 2.
I'm still thinking,
Okay.
all right?
We can have, yes,
No.
no. So we'll introduce the ordinance tonight. We can always come back to the table and amend it.
Right. I want to
Right.
make it clear.
Please.
A discussion on the original motion.
Go ahead.
That we are introducing this.
All right.
We've already had one discussion brought to us by the chief of police and others on the staff, as I recall. I'm not about to conclude because 2 people testify that it's unconstitutional. I want to hear pros and cons, and I want to have a work session to discuss it. So I think
I
that,
understand. I think.
that is the procedure. So I'm not saying I'm wed to this particular provision at the moment.
I heard a motion made to introduce the ordinance by Mr. Alshire, but I did not hear a second to
I
that
seconded it.
motion. Okay.
Marty seconded.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've had a motion by Mr. Alshire and a second by Mr. Brubaker. Any further discussion?
I need to reintroduce the motion.
I don't think so.
No.
Okay.
All those in favor of introducing this ordinance, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please
Nay.
say no. Okay. Ordinance is introduced 3-2. We will bring it back to the table.
Great.
Item B under new business, introduction of an ordinance, transfer of land adjacent to 21 to 23 North Locust Street to CB Properties LLC.
Mr. Mayor, hereby move for the introduction of an ordinance authorizing the transfer of land adjacent 21 to 23 North Locust Street. The property would be conveyed to CB Properties LLC to be used by Burkett's Deli as an outdoor cafe.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Alshire and seconded by Mr. Munson. Any discussion? All those in favor of introducing the ordinance, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries and the ordinance is introduced. Item C, introduction of an ordinance for a quit claim, 216 North Cleveland Avenue.
Did you skip one?
Ritchie Road, Mr. Mayor?
Skip Rich Road.
Oh,
That's
they're out of order.
I'm
Mayor's
just
right.
going- I'm
We're-
following
we're
the
wrong.
agenda
Mr.
here.
Mayor, I hereby move for the introduction of an ordinance to authorize the execution of quitclaim deed for a strip of unimproved land to rear of 517, 521, 523, and 525 Jefferson Street, as requested by Christ Lutheran Church. Strip of land is not needed for any public purpose.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Metzner, seconded by Mr. Brubaker. Any discussion? All those in favor of the introduction of the ordinance, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries and the ordinance is introduced. Next up, item D, approval of a resolution, residential lease agreement for property at 12727 Ritchie Road.
Mr. Mayor, I
I move
hereby-
that the mayor and city council adopt the attached resolution authorizing the execution of a lease between the city of Hagerstown and Dwayne Miller for the residence located at 12727 Ritchie Road, Smithsburg, Maryland.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Brubaker and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The resolution is approved. Item E is the approval of a contract extension, the third extension agreement between the city and Sinagro Wastewater Treatment Incorporated.
Mayor, I would move to approve the attached third extension agreement for operations and maintenance services between the City of Hagerstown and Sinagro WWT Incorporated. This agreement extends the existing operating terms of the original contract dated November 22nd, 1988, and the extension agreement dated June 29, 2006, for a term of 10 years.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Metzner and seconded by Mr. Munson. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, and the contract is approved. Item F, authorization to accept a grant from the Maryland Department of Business and Economic Development.
Mayor, hereby move that the mayor and city council authorize staff to accept a $100,000 grant from the Maryland Department of Business and Economic Development for the purpose of hiring a consultant to conduct an economic analysis and prepare an implementation plan for Hagerstown's Sustainable Community Plan.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Brubaker and seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Authorization is approved. Thank you. We are adjourned.